Maria Gonzalez had been cleaning houses for wealthy families for 15 years, organizing their photo albums and maintaining their perfect lives. But the mansion on Elm Street held a secret that would destroy her world. While dusting the family room, she found her own wedding photo displayed among the Whitman family pictures, a photo from her marriage to James 15 years ago, before he disappeared with a briefcase full of money. The woman she'd been working for was James's new wife, and Maria had been erased from their family history as if she'd never existed. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitman mansion as Maria Gonzalez began her weekly cleaning routine. At 45, she had been working as a professional housekeeper for 15 years, building a client base of wealthy families who valued her discretion, attention to detail, and the way she could make their homes spotless without disrupting their lives. The Whitman house was one of her favorites, a sprawling estate in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, filled with beautiful furnishings and what appeared to be a genuinely happy family. Mrs. Catherine Whitman was always polite and respectful, treating Maria like a valued professional rather than invisible help. Mr. James Whitman traveled frequently for business, so Maria rarely saw him, but the house was filled with evidence of their successful marriage and comfortable life. Maria took pride in her work, seeing it as more than just cleaning. She was maintaining sanctuaries where families created memories, preserving the spaces where love lived. It was honest work that allowed her to support herself and her teenage daughter Elena, while Elena finished high school and prepared for college. Maria's own life had been much different 15 years ago, before everything fell apart. She'd been married then to a man named James Rivera who'd promised her the world and then taken everything she had. They'd lived in a modest house across town, dreaming of building a business together, saving money for their future children, planning a life that seemed full of possibility. James had been charming and ambitious, working in finance and always talking about investment opportunities that would make them wealthy. Maria had worked as a bank teller then, and together they'd saved nearly $50,000, money they planned to use as a down payment on a larger house and to start the family they both wanted. The disappearance had happened on a Tuesday morning in March 2008. Maria had woken up to find James's side of the bed empty, his clothes gone from the closet, and their joint savings account completely drained. There was no note, no explanation, no trace of where he'd gone or why. The police had investigated but found no evidence of foul play, just a man who'd cleaned out his bank accounts and vanished. Maria had spent months trying to track him down, hiring a private investigator she couldn't afford, following every lead that went nowhere. Eventually, she'd been forced to accept that James was gone forever, taking her money, her trust, and her dreams with him. The modest house had been foreclosed on, and Maria had moved into a small apartment with Elena, starting over with nothing but her determination to survive. Cleaning houses had been her salvation. The work was steady, honest, and allowed her to see how families could flourish when they treated each other with love and respect. She'd built a new life from the ashes of the old one, and while she wasn't wealthy, she was proud of what she'd accomplished on her own. The Whitman house represented everything Maria had once dreamed of having: the beautiful home, the successful marriage, the comfortable life built on mutual trust and shared goals. She'd been cleaning for the Whitmans for 3 years, and their happiness always reminded her that good marriages did exist, even if hers hadn't been one of them. Today's cleaning routine started in the kitchen, then moved through the formal dining room and into the family room, where the Whitmans displayed their most treasured family photos. Maria always took extra care dusting these pictures, knowing they represented the most important moments in her employers' lives. The mantelpiece held the usual collection: wedding photos, vacation pictures, images of Catherine and James at various social events. There were photos of James receiving business awards, Catherine at charity functions, and candid shots of them together looking genuinely happy. As Maria lifted each frame to dust beneath it, she noticed a new addition to the collection. Tucked between a vacation photo and an anniversary picture was a wedding photograph she'd never seen before. It appeared to be older than the others, with a slightly different coloring and style of a photo from the early 2000s. Maria picked up the frame to dust it and found herself staring at an image that made no sense. The bride in the photo had dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of pink roses. She was standing next to a groom in a black tuxedo, both of them smiling at the camera with the joy of newlyweds. The bride was Maria herself. The groom was James, not James Whitman, but James Rivera, her missing husband from 15 years ago. Maria's hands began shaking as she stared at her own wedding photo, displayed in the family room of the people she'd been working for. This was the picture that had once sat on her own mantelpiece, in the house she'd shared with James before he disappeared. She'd assumed he'd taken it with him when he left, along with everything else of value. But here it was, carefully preserved and prominently displayed among the Whitman family photos. Maria set the frame down and stepped back, her mind reeling. How could her wedding photo be in the Whitman house? Why would they have a picture of her marriage to James Rivera? Unless Maria looked more closely at the other photos on the mantelpiece, focusing on the images of James Whitman that she'd dusted hundreds of times without really studying. The man in the expensive suits, the successful businessman, the loving husband, she'd always seen him in passing, never paying close attention to his features. Now, studying his face with the desperate attention of someone whose world was collapsing, Maria realized the devastating truth. James Whitman was James Rivera. Her missing husband hadn't disappeared into anonymity or started over in some distant city. He'd stayed in the same town, changed his name, and built a new life just 20 miles from where he'd abandoned Maria. He'd used her stolen money to establish himself as James Whitman, eventually meeting and marrying Catherine, creating the successful life he'd always promised Maria they'd have together. Maria sank onto the Whitmans' expensive sofa, staring at her own wedding photo and trying to process the implications. For 3 years, she'd been cleaning the house that her own money had helped buy. She'd been dusting the photos of the life James had built after destroying hers. She'd been respectfully maintaining the home of the woman who had replaced her, never knowing that her employer's husband was the man who had stolen her future. The sound of the front door opening sent Maria into a panic. Mrs. Whitman wasn't supposed to be home for hours, but Maria could hear footsteps in the foyer. "Maria, are you here?" Catherine's voice called out. "Yes, Mrs. Whitman," Maria managed to say, quickly replacing the wedding photo on the mantelpiece. "I'm in the family room." Catherine appeared in the doorway, looking elegant as always in her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. At 38, she was 7 years younger than Maria, with the confident bearing of someone who'd never known financial struggle or abandonment. "I hope you don't mind that I came home early," Catherine said. "I have a conference call with Hong Kong at 2, and I want to take it from home." "Of course not, Mrs. Whitman. I'll try to keep the noise down." Catherine smiled warmly. "You never make noise, Maria. You're like a ghost. Everything just magically becomes perfect after you've been here." Maria forced a smile, but her mind was racing. Should she confront Catherine about James? Should she demand answers about how her wedding photo had ended up in their collection? Should she reveal that she was James's abandoned first wife? "Mrs. Whitman," Maria said carefully, "I noticed a new photo on the mantelpiece. The older wedding picture. Is that a family member?" Catherine glanced at the mantelpiece, and her expression softened. "Oh, that. James asked me to display it last week. It's from his first marriage. I don't usually keep photos of his ex-wife around, but he said it was important to him for some reason." "His first marriage?" Maria's voice was barely steady. "Yes, he was married before we met. A young marriage that didn't work out. His wife left him, I believe. James doesn't like to talk about it much. I think it was quite painful for him." Maria felt sick. James had rewritten their entire history, casting himself as the abandoned husband rather than the man who had stolen and disappeared. He'd turned Maria into the villain of their story while living comfortably in the house her money had helped purchase. Did he say what happened to his first wife? Catherine looked at Maria with mild curiosity. "You seem very interested in James's past. Is everything all right?" Maria realized she was treading on dangerous ground. If she revealed the truth now, without proof or preparation, it would sound like the ravings of a jealous cleaning lady. Catherine would never believe that her successful businessman husband was actually a thief who had abandoned his first wife. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitman. I was just making conversation. The photo is beautiful. They look very happy." "Yes, they do." James said they were young and naive, thought love was enough. He learned a lot from that relationship about what really matters in marriage. The irony was crushing. James had learned enough to steal Maria's money and use it to build the foundation for a better marriage with someone else. "Well, I should get back to work," Maria said, gathering her cleaning supplies with shaking hands. "Of course. I'll be in the office if you need anything." As Catherine disappeared upstairs, Maria stood alone in the family room, surrounded by photos of the life that should have been hers. The successful businessman in the expensive suits, the beautiful home, the comfortable lifestyle, all of it built on the foundation of her stolen savings and destroyed dreams. For the rest of that day, Maria mechanically went through the motions of cleaning while her mind raced with questions and possibilities. How long had James been living as James Whitman? How had he established his new identity? Did Catherine know the truth about her husband's past? Or was she as much a victim of his deception as Maria had been? That evening, Maria went home to her small apartment and began researching. Using the internet and her knowledge of James's habits and background, she started piecing together the timeline of his transformation from James Rivera to James Whitman. What she discovered was a carefully constructed deception that had taken years to complete. James had used her stolen money to establish a legitimate business, gradually building credit and references under his new name. He'd moved in wealthy social circles, eventually meeting Catherine at a charity function where his successful businessman persona was complete and convincing. Maria also discovered that James Whitman was worth millions now, money that should have been partly hers, profits built on investments made with funds stolen from their joint account. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. Maria could expose James, could reveal to Catherine that her husband was a fraud and a thief. But doing so would destroy an innocent woman's life and marriage, would shatter the happiness Maria had been observing and envying for 3 years. On the other hand, James had stolen 15 years of Maria's life, had forced her into poverty and struggle while he lived in luxury, just miles away. He'd rewritten their history to make himself the victim and her the villain. He deserved to face consequences for what he'd done. The decision was made for her the following Tuesday when she arrived at the Whitman house to find James there, home unexpectedly from a business trip. They stared at each other across the foyer, 15 years of history and betrayal hanging between them like a live wire. "Hello, Maria," James said quietly, his successful businessman facade cracking to reveal the man who had destroyed her life. "Hello, James," she replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "I suppose you have questions." "Just one," Maria said. "Why did you keep our wedding photo?" James looked toward the family room, where their picture sat among his new life's memories. "Guilt, maybe. Or maybe I wanted to remember what I threw away when I made the worst decision of my life." "You didn't throw it away, James. You stole it. You stole everything." "I know, and I've regretted it every day since. Regretted it enough to build a fortune on my stolen money." James had no answer for that. The confrontation that followed lasted 2 hours and ended with James agreeing to make restitution. Not just the money he'd stolen, but interest and damages that reflected what Maria's life could have been if he hadn't destroyed it. Catherine, devastated but determined to do what was right, supported Maria despite learning that her marriage was built on lies and theft. 6 months later, Maria Gonzalez opened her own cleaning service, employing a dozen women who specialized in helping families maintain the homes where their memories lived. She never returned to the Whitman house, but she heard through mutual acquaintances that Catherine had divorced James and started over, just as Maria had been forced to do 15 years earlier. The wedding photo that had exposed the truth was returned to Maria, but she didn't display it. Instead, she kept it in a drawer as a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we're simply doing our jobs with care and attention, dusting the evidence of lives that intersect with our own in ways we never imagined.